Well, welcome everyone. My name is Michael Smith. I am the Global CEO for Randstad Sourceright, and I'm joined today by Sam Schlimper, who is the Global Head of Talent Acquisition for Barclays Bank. Sam, thanks so much for being with us today.
Nice to be here.
And the topic that we're going to be discussing is direct sourcing, particularly learning from some of the best practices that Barclays have implemented based on the long journey that they've already been on in implementing direct sourcing globally in many countries. And let's start, Sam, with getting started on direct sourcing. We've seen effectively different regions adopt direct sourcing at different rates over the last decade. The UK was obviously a little bit of a front runner. We then had pockets of Asia Pacific quickly follow suit, followed by mainland Europe. But more recently, North America, in particular the US, has really been gathering pace on this direct sourcing movement. In your own experience, how did you get started with direct sourcing at Barclays?
So I think, and it has been a while, and obviously we've kind of changed and evolved that over time, but I think it is about what is our business looking for and how was that going to work and what was going to be the best option for us, and actually starting small. So I think your point's valid. It's kind of opening doors where doors are open and experimenting a little bit and almost through evidence showing how that's going to work and then growing that out. So our business almost became advocates for it, and then so we'd grown and we went on, and now, as you said, we have a globally consistent offering that works really well for us.
Well, when you see direct sourcing working well, one of the issues that we typically see some North American leaders needing to overcome is this idea around, I'm really fearful of upsetting the supply chain that I have currently, particularly in light of the current environment. How did you get to a stage where you were able to convince the internal stakeholders who have those critical roles being recruited for them currently to say it's going to be okay, we're going to make this work?
So I think it's not kind of a loss of relationship, because they still have a part to play in some instances. And I think it's also the partnership, who you choose as your partner and how they treat people in the marketplace. So I think there's room for everyone. I also think it depends on what you're trying to drive, right? So if you're looking, for us, certainly the quality and speed and all of those good things, and cost was a big factor. But there are times when the supply chain will still come into play when it's appropriate. And it's how our partners and we treat that supply chain that kind of keeps those relationships. It hasn't been for us an issue. And in fact, it's because it's sort of multifaceted, that approach, that we can kind of move along as we go, and the direct sourcing then grows with it, which is what we have today and have a really good kind of success rate.
And have you seen it grown over the years? Can you walk us through the journey of the almost decade you've been on direct sourcing, on this direct sourcing journey?
Now asking me to go back into my archives of data, which it's worrying. But I think, and again, it's kind of pushing on doors that are open and then having a look at that. So I think our conversion rate, our kind of use of direct sourcing has gone up and up and up over time. I did check our current data, and I think we've got a 97.5% use of direct sourcing, and UK we've got 100, but that shows you there's still that kind of change happening. But I mean, that's a massive percentage. So, and as I say, we don't have a fallout from relationships with that.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, one of the things that we also hear a lot from clients, Sam, who are thinking about going on this journey is that it gives them an opportunity to monetize their brand in some way, shape or form, given the fact that they've obviously invested a lot into that, and try to make the candidate journey, typically for contingent workers, aligned with the feeling of what it's like to utilize their products or services.
Yeah.
Has that been a part of your journey at Barclays?
Absolutely. And I guess, look, we're a consumer business, right, as well as other, but that experience that we want for as consumers generally, and how we want the consumers of our business, that's what we want our candidates to feel. And so that's certainly that seamless journey, and having that brand consistent throughout. I think there's kind of two levels of that. It's who we are as an organization, and then the way you actually work with your candidate either aligns with that or it could be complicated and 17 different people to talk to. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for that kind of straight through, streamline, aligns with our brand, aligns with what our consumers are looking for. And that was definitely a part of why direct sourcing works for us.
And in terms of the measurements of success at the moment, what sort of the lens do you look at it from?
So I think for us, generally, when we think about hiring, we kind of look at 4 things, and that's the same. And then we look at what works within that. So for us, the experience is probably an overriding factor. And I think it's experience for our customers. And I think that comes in, for me, 3 different forms. One is our business. Another one is our candidates and our colleagues out there. And then for me, it's also the team. And our partner is an extension of our team. So what's the experience for them and how do they feel like they're adding value? So that's one of the first things. There's certainly a cost element to it. We're a commercial business. So how does this make sense from that perspective? There's speed, right? So you go through different cycles. It's very much a candidate-driven market. So that speed to offer and speed to getting people over the line is really, really important for us. And then quality not being at the bottom of the list, it's kind of these things interplay, but the quality of our candidates. And we measure that by looking at things like conversion rates, right? Time and process. So and everything these days, we kind of talk about it a lot, but it is data-driven. So that's one of the other things in terms of taking our business on the journey, is using that data to show them. And using the data to evidence what those conversion rates are in the time to process and how that works for them, where it saves them time, where technology plays a part that enhances the experience, and where we put in our human team in those moments that matter.
Maybe a bit of a controversial question, Sam, but often you see organizations, when they're thinking about direct sourcing, saying, look, there's still a place for the supply chain, as you mentioned earlier. And we need to have still an engaged supply chain, either through ourselves or through our partner, etc. But we want to be a little bit more in charge of our own destiny here. And we want to think about the direct sourcing team as almost an augmentation of our internal talent acquisition team.
Yep.
And we want to align their KPIs similar to effectively what the KPIs are of our internal talent acquisition team.
Yeah.
How have you tackled that or thought about that at Barclays? Has that rung true for you?
It's absolutely rung true. And I think it is the case. So just because, I think there's 2 things. Like, first of all, I think you have to choose your partner, both around capability. They should be able to do the job, get it done really well, all of those things. But they have to align, and their values and their kind of purpose has to align with your purpose team. So I think that's part of that, because to your point, the team isn't someone different. That team is my team as much as it's your team, as much as it is our brand. And to be honest, our business and our candidates shouldn't even feel that it's anything different, right? So they may get dual branding or what have you, but that is part of that experience. It should tell who we are as an organization, and that experience should follow that. So certainly, and I think, we've evolved as well around looking at, SLAs can drive some great things, and they can drive some real unintended consequences. So your point is valid. You have to have flexibility around that and say, this framework is what we're trying to achieve. I also think giving people autonomy who work within that is really important. Yep. Their flavor and their personality should come through. That's part of the experience, as long as it lives by the design principles of what you're trying to achieve. So that certainly rings true for us. Yeah.
So if you were to go back and kind of give yourself some advice on wanting to shortcut to get more success out of direct sourcing, what kind of messages would you go back and give yourself?
So I think it's interesting, right? Because as you say, the kind of globe's moved on, and it's kind of pushing on those open doors as you go. I almost think if we use data and we're more bold with that as we've gone, we could have probably augmented that. I think the other thing is sometimes you're tentative when you go in and you kind of simplify processes to a certain amount, and then you leave that in because someone really likes that or feels really strongly about it. I would say simplification is a key to actually getting people to take this up. So for your users, make it as simple as possible, as kind of consumer-centric as possible, like we've said.
Yep.
Versus sometimes we get stuck in our own, well, that's important and this is important. You get stuck in your own talent acquisition head.
Yep.
Not really about that. There is a science to it, and you should be able to evidence that, and you should be able to make it valid and all of those things. But the data is going to tell your story. Gather the data, measure it, gather the data, measure it, and it builds its own momentum. And I would do that faster.
Interesting. Just to touch on a point you made earlier about the very volatile, uncertain, complex world we're living in the moment, where workforce planning is incredibly difficult. We saw a lot of organizations, as a result of not understanding when things may return to normal, and I hate that phrase, so I apologize, but say we need more flexibility and agility in our workforce. Yeah. As a result of that, we're going to hire more contingent workers for an unforeseen period, etc.
Yeah.
And what we want to make sure is we're now hiring contingent workers in areas and in quantities that we particularly may not have done so previously. We need to ensure that the process is still agile, is still flexible, still delivering what we want, but we'd like a higher predictability around that process. And we saw a lot of organizations say the direct sourcing process for contingent can look a bit more like permanent. So there was an introduction of short assessments, there was personality traits, competencies, and a lot of organizations who have gone down that path have spoken volumes of the increased predictability and the quality of hire that they've got from their contingent workforce. Yeah. Knowing Barclays have done that, what have you seen from some of that?
So, and I think that's right. And I think it kind of also goes to your workforce is made up of many kind of facets, right? You have a permanent element, you have a non-permanent element, you have a contingent, you have all different pieces, and they're just as important to each other. And your point is valid. I think it's a really volatile kind of marketplace. So you need to be a little bit flexible around that too, right? Yeah. So it's not like that's the route and off you go. And sometimes we have that, right? Sometimes we have that is the route, that's all I'm doing. And then it's kind of like, actually those insights and market insights tell us that might not be the best route to go. So I think there's a part around what are the market insights, what's it feeding you? And then it's really important because your partners kind of give that to, that's the right outcome. And as long as that happens, that works really well. Yep. So I certainly think that is part of the experience and part of what we do. It's not a one or the other. It's a multifaceted element that comes together that gets you the right outcome. I do think in this market, predicting demand is almost impossible, right? So again, I think there's and we're kind of looking at that in terms of a continuous improvement. How do we do that better? And then there'll always be this erratic piece. And how do you get set up to do both of those at the same time?
It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Sam, you spoke a bit earlier about the 100% in the UK, the 97.5% in other markets, etc. What's some of the anecdotal feedback you get from the hiring managers?
So, and we use a tool, right? So we get anecdotal feedback on the ground because that always swells up, particularly if things aren't going well. That's when you get feedback, right? Generally, as you know, in talent acquisition, if things are going well, you don't hear anything from anybody other than the kind of the rare few who decide to tell you, oh, I really, thank you so much. But we actually measure that. So we use a tool internally called Qualtrics, and we measure that consistently all the time, both for candidate feedback and for our hiring manager feedback. We also have, and I think you need to have multi-channels. We have our internal team, and then we have our partner team, your team, go out and ask, right? And I think that feedback loop and that I want to know how to improve, that kind of, we show up with an attitude of continuous improvement. That actually is quite disarming. It allows people to give feedback in a really constructive way. And I think that's one of the successes is there's continuous improvement. There's experimentation. And I know you and I have this conversation often as to the team is to say, well, where should we experiment with something new? Maybe we try that. Let's give it a go. Sometimes we don't get it off the ground. Sometimes we do get it off the ground, but it's kind of like having that constant thought process around where could that be? It might not be now, but let's not forget about it. And I think that's helpful.
So Sam, one of the things on the journey that you've been on is going from direct sourcing at 30% in mainly what we consider commoditized roles and moving up to 50 and less commoditized and then getting up to 197.5 in some of those more specialist and niche roles. How have the hiring managers reacted to that over time?
So again, I think it's data-led, but the hiring managers actually have a really good experience with the quality of the candidate, and we see that in conversion rates. So as one of the things, but also the feedback they give to us. I think one of the unique things, as we said, kind of specialist in each, the hiring manager is still quite involved in that process. In our volume and repeatable areas, and we have a really strong focus on kind of customer service and those kind of roles, RSR really take that, and the science that is built around the technology and the experience allows the decision to be made on behalf of the hiring manager. And I think at first that felt really uncomfortable for hiring managers. Someone else is making my hiring decision. The reality is the hiring decision has been made against objective, fantastic tech with data that supports it, that says actually our quality goes up when we take them out of the process. Maybe we won't tell them that, but it actually does. It kind of goes up and we do a better conversion. So I think that's been something for them to get used of. It's almost this loss of control, but it's a better quality outcome. And we get that feedback is, I wish I'd done more of that. It saves me a whole lot of time. And I have my person here quickly and they're great quality and they kind of stay with us.
It's an incredibly differentiated proposition that you're offering there, in that sense that you are being incredibly data-led in the hiring decision, the competency test, the assessment for contingent workers, really taking that hiring decision out of the hiring manager's hands. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, like, when was the first step towards going, you know what, we're going to do this? Was it an A/B test? Was it a pilot?
It was a pilot. So we did a bit of a pilot in one of our areas where kind of speed was really important. We said, and to be honest, it's one of those things, right? You put out an hypothesis and you don't necessarily have to believe in it. And that's also for our own team, a little bit of a learn. Because it's often, well, we believe in this, so we're going to try and hypothesize and we'll prove the hypothesis. It's almost like we're going to do this hypothesis, no one knows. And it's almost stepping back from the outcome being the thing you're driving to the experiment and the pilot being the hiring. And we actually learned a different way of working, and that's kind of how we now go forward, is it doesn't have to be the outcome we're expecting or that we want. It's about the experiment and making that happen. And so that's how, it's been a learning experience from that perspective.
Awesome. The value proposition of working as a contingent worker at Barclays is really defined and differentiated to what it's like to work as a permanent worker. Can you tell us how that all comes together?
Sure. And I was going to say, I think it's a coming together. So I think we have a really strong branding experience that the teams work together in. And candidates these days, it's about the reputation of the organization as much as it's about the job they're going to do. And the experience that they have coming through the front door needs to knit that all together. And so the purpose that we have in society, kind of reimagining finance, what that means, and doing that kind of on a one-to-one relationship, I think those things come together to say, how do we put ourselves out there? This is who we are. It's consistent. It's simple. It's that message. And then the RSR team live that through all of the different processes and all of the different technologies that we use, and that comes to life. So it is about that front door, right? That's how it comes to life in saying, that is reimagining finance. This is how relationships building on one-to-one, there you feel it and experience it. And so coming in the door, you're just as important to us as anybody who's coming in on a permanent basis. So it's kind of knitted together, yeah.
And maybe just a future forward question. Magic wand, you can fix 2 or 3 things that you think would just continue to really accelerate the impact that contingent talent is having on your business. Is there any things on the roadmap that you're ambitiously thinking about ticking off?
Absolutely, and we always are, kind of always experimenting. So I do think technology plays a big part in that, and I think it is experimenting with technology. So we've spoken about the science of that is the way we evidence why people are really great at their jobs, why they want to work for us, and how that comes together. I think that coming together as a holistic ecosystem even more will become more important, right? So what is it that you want as an individual, not just in your job, but as a human being, and how you weave that into this is a process of having a job and all the impact that you can make because you've got a variety coming in as a contingent worker. How fast do you make that impact? How do you show that? And if we can help people do that, I think that's on the roadmap to where we go.
Nice. And we've obviously got a lot of listeners here from the US that are about to ideally embark on a direct sourcing journey. Any kind of final words of wisdom for them? And it sounds like you just kind of have to go for it and choose those places, get your evidence, get your measures in place,
pick somewhere where you really can show that, and with data be able to go, this is why it works, this is what's not working, and this is how you change it and do it. But it is so worth it. The cost saving, the experience, the quality, they kind of stand and speak for themselves.
Sam, thanks so much for your time today.
Good. Nice to talk to you.